Riverbed Technologies, and two very, very successful exits, an IPO and an M&A type sale exit. And basically, like a lot of the other events we've done like this, it's really open forum, open question. I've even talked to Wayne. He doesn't have any prepared script or anything like that. He'll probably talk a little bit about what he's done in some of the different places. But certainly at that point, it's mostly question and answer. Whatever you want to hear from Wayne, hopefully he'll be willing to talk about and answer. So without any further delay, let me turn it over to Wayne and let's go get going with the program.
Thank you. I apologize for having lowered the bar for the definition of a legend. So just a little bit about my background. I went to James Madison University, majored in finance and minored in computer science. I think I have the lowest graduating GPA in the history of the school. 2.0001. Started my career teaching skiing and tennis, and then decided to get entrepreneurial. I actually don't think any of you know this. I've been through 2 failed startups. My first was a database company that I started in 1983, and I wrote probably the only relational database system for Commodore VIC-20.
How'd that work out?
I actually sold it. That was when they were moving from tape cassettes to discs. And then in 1988 started a bulletin board service, thinking that this notion of people talking with one another via networks might be a good thing someday. And I was 10 years too early. But so those were my 2 failures. Moved up here in 1991. I went to work for a guy named Paul Black, who ran Noblestar, which was out. I guess that wasn't in Reston then, down Beltway some, and was given the opportunity to start an emerging technologies practice, which was a wonderful opportunity. Grew that for a few years. I think it was actually an interesting kind of notion. He said, you can grow this as fast as you want to, but you have to be profitable. So that was an interesting experience. Grew that to about 150 or so consultants. Had a small practice that was built by a guy named Dave Renson. Dave had this notion that small form factor devices were going to be a great mechanism for moving enterprise data out into the field. And E2 was a little bit early, but fortunately we built that company in the bubble. But started that in 1998 and spun that out of Noblestar, and that became Riverbed, which was the first company that I had the good fortune to build. And that was we started that in August of '98 and sold it for $1 billion in March of 2000. So that was a 15-month company. But at any rate, one of the things that I reflect back on often when we talk about this, if you're curious, is all the opportunities for failure that have somehow survived. But the theory of Riverbed was that because everybody was overfunded, every company that was pursuing this category had huge amounts of cash, and so we made the decision pretty early on that we wouldn't be able to grow that company fast enough through any normal direct means, so we pursued an OEM strategy. And so Simple Technologies, who owned the patents for barcoding at the time, was our first target. Geez, that's the perfect group. They're going to use home devices or standard devices to reduce the cost of their barcode readers, and they're going to need a way to move information to and from those devices. And so let's pursue an OEM deal with home or with Simple. And we thought we had a deal. Had a handshake, negotiating a term sheet. And I remember getting a call on a Friday night at 8 o'clock. And I'd like to suggest that I'm a workaholic and always work at 8 o'clock. But I live in Columbia, so I avoid traffic by showing up late and working. We got a call at 8 o'clock on Friday night by our champion at Symbol, and he said, Wayne, look, I got some bad news. Keith, who was this guy's boss, had a meeting with Felix, who was the CEO of one of our competitors. And Felix really gave him a great sales job and decided to go with Avant-Go. And that was really, really bad news. I said, geez, is there anything we can do? I said, look, I talked to Keith. I think it's a bad decision. Keith is at least open to meeting with you, but you got to be here tomorrow morning for breakfast. So, anyway, so I was crazy enough to get on an airplane in hopes of salvaging the deal. Met with Keith at a Denny's in Los Angeles at 7:30 the following morning on Saturday, and somehow managed to get that deal turned around. But looking back, if I hadn't been there at 8 o'clock, hadn't been willing to get on a plane, if he hadn't been willing to meet, we would have been a zero. And so it's interesting how those things happen. I remember at SourceFire, you guys know that SourceFire is a network security company built around this open source technology called Snort, does intrusion detection. And I got there, started working with Marty in late 01, joined the company in May of 02, started bringing a bunch of the all-stars that I'd worked with in the past, mostly from Riverbed, to really build out a go-to-market for us. And seemed to really have some momentum. We did $1 million in our first quarter, that we had Salesforce before 02. Had a great Q1 and Q2 of 03. And then Gartner came out with this report declaring IDS dead. Saying IDS is stupid, it generates too many false alarms, nobody has any real possibility of following up on these things. Just if you've got budget allocated, IDS, just put it in the bank. Don't even bother. And so that was one of those real gut check moments for SourceFire. And it was also interesting how partnering with folks that are really smart and helping companies work. So Marty at the time, Marty Rush was the founder of SourceFire, brilliant guy. If you haven't met him, I encourage you to seek him out. Came to my office, we talked about, okay, IDS is dead. Gartner's saying you need to put intrusion detection algorithms in line so that they can at least block traffic if they see bad stuff. And as we thought about it, we went, geez, all right, IDS is dead, and it's dead because the algorithms aren't sufficiently precise, and they generate too many false alarms, and they can't detect weird stuff. But they're recommending that you put that kind of capability in the path of traffic. That doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? So at first, we started, blogging and talking to folks and telling people how stupid Gartner was. And that was a real big mistake. That was my first lesson in how powerful Gartner can be. But then we decided that, geez, rather than just sort of doing a Me Too intrusion prevention thing, why don't we actually fix the problem? And so we invented this technology called RNA, which figures out what's on the network and informs intrusion detection algorithms about sort of the context of what they're doing. Pascal, you remember all these debates. And we built RNA instead of just sort of jumping into the IPS game. And tactically, it was a really bad decision because one of the things we missed the following couple of quarters because we didn't have intrusion prevention story. But strategically, it made the company. And it's probably the company's lasting differentiator even today. So, at any rate, that was, I guess, another oh my God moment. For those of you who know SourceFire at all, also know about the checkpoint deal, which was sort of the next, or one of our potential death moments. But Checkpoint tried to acquire SourceFire. I guess they approached us in June of 05, and negotiated what I thought was a pretty compelling deal. It was, at the time about a 10x revenues transaction, which for the post-bubble era was a pretty compelling multiple. Riverbed was a 40, but, at a different time. And announced the deal in September, and one of my less proud omissions was my failure to ask for a breakup fee. We thought there was a very compelling reason to put the companies together. They were committed to the deal. We of the contract if government decided that, for whatever reason, the deal shouldn't work. And there were two provisions. One was, the antitrust provision, and we knew that wasn't right. And there's this other weird one called Exxon Florio. And Exxon Florio made a provision for the federal government, the president specifically, to make decisions about whether transactions were or were not in the best interest of the federal government. And I did the most superficial analysis of that deal. And he said, well, why would we be a threat to the federal, this transaction be a threat to the federal government? They buy stuff from the checkpoint. Our stuff wasn't trade restrained. The core of what we did was open source, and so anybody could use it. And so we just kind of dismissed that notion. As it turned out, the government really did care, and for a number of reasons. One, they had a pretty significant degree of reliance on SNORT as an open source technology, and they were the checkpoint was going to propose it. RNA, which is that sort of network composition discovery technology, had two phases. On the good side, it could find potential vulnerabilities in the network and inform intrusion systems how to protect those. In the nefarious sense, you could use it to do passive vulnerability discovery with an intent to exploit those vulnerabilities. And unlike active systems, people would never know you were coming. So they were really worried about RNA getting into the hands of not so friendly foreign nationals. And this was something, again, it's embarrassing how naive one can be, but I didn't realize how the government perceived Israel in the espionage context. And so all of that stuff put together, and they threatened to deny the deal, and ultimately did deny the deal. So we found ourselves in March of '06 with, gosh, I don't know these numbers right, but I recall correctly. Do you remember what our burn was in '06? The gross burn had to have been $3 or $4 million a quarter.
I thought it was 3.5.
Yeah, we had $2 million in the bank, and and so that was one of the other ones. And again, what do you do in that situation? And we kind of talked about 3 different alternatives. We could do some bridge funding and keep the company alive. We could do a process and sell the company, or sort of suck it up and figure out a way to make the thing work. And we did the latter. And so we went out and raised a Series D. I think we raised, what, $23 million, something like that, which we actually wound up not spending. But kept the team together, made a real strong effort to get public, and ultimately did. But at any rate, had many opportunities to fail. It's remarkable if we didn't. How many have I forgotten? Pascal was one of our investors.
That you know about?
How many times did I almost get fired? That's an So at any rate, so now it's kind of interesting. I'm on the board of a few companies in the region, having a lot of fun doing that. It's been interesting, kind of spreading my limited mental bandwidth across many sort of problems, as opposed to focusing on one specific problem. But a lot of companies in the region now are dealing with those kind of life and death kind of moments, especially in these times. And it's interesting that I'm trying to help folks through that, because the right answer is never particularly obvious, and often it's contrarian. So, at any rate, but there's a little bit of the struggle that I've been through. What are you guys seeing these days? Everything's easy?
So Wayne, I don't know that in my long life I've ever seen a time where the government was actively taking such a role in day-to-day corporate life. You saw it from the regulatory side. How do you think this sort of oversight by the government of salaries and structure and governance is going to change corporate life?
I don't want to sound like, Starbucks is something that I have to live with, SourceFire. And again, I don't want to overstate my fears, but I mean, there's the potential that Starbucks could have the effect of killing the venture capital industry. And so the logic chain in that conclusion is that, again, SourceFire spent 8% of revenues last year getting Starbucks compliant. It made the difference between being profitable and not being profitable. I read somewhere that the average level of effort in getting Starbucks compliant is 26,000 hours in the first year. Something $4 million is the average expenditure. And so for Exxon, that's trivial. It's not a number, but for a startup doing $50 million in revenue, it's huge. And for all kinds of reasons. And so what that has the effect of doing here is extending, even in normal times, the time that the window of getting public by 2 or 3 years, because now you have to do $100 million company instead of $50 million. So if the average time of investment by a venture firm is 6 years, I think that's about the average now.
Which is now 47.
So it's 7, and now it winds up becoming 9 or 10. That's beyond the window that people assume funds are going to live in many cases. Certainly the durability of partnerships often lasts less than that. So I'm really worried about it. And Starbucks was very well intentioned. It's like, we can't let in our happen. It's great. But in the meantime, we're going to make it impossible for small companies to get public in the window of venture investment.
Well, actually, the New York Stock Exchange, Meta had a group at this exchange last fall, and they believe it's destroyed the IPO market in the U.S. But that's why there were more IPOs for technology companies outside the U.S. last year than ever in history, than there were in the U.S. Than ever, and that's probably the side effect. So
It's certainly a side effect. And hopefully companies like SourceFire will figure out how to get Starbucks compliant without the kind of challenges that we went through, but it's a really tough process. So again, I hope there's some reform there. But so if you extrapolate that to all of the things that they're doing now with regard to clawing back bonuses and regulating salaries and all that sort of stuff, I mean, there's just got to be a chilling effect associated with that. So anyway, I wish them luck. They're a bunch of smart people than I am, but they're moving so quickly, and especially the AIG thing. Again, it's distasteful for all those bonuses to be granted and knowledge, but for them to sort of react to the mob mentality in the way that they did, I found personally frightening. Yes, sir.
What was your experience starting in the open source space? What kind of advantages and challenges did that present?
Many on both fronts. It's funny, when I first met Marty, I was, as my hobbies, but I used to drive race cars. So I was having fun with race cars and hanging out with a bunch of neat people and going all over the place. And so I wasn't all that receptive to the notion of working again. And then when I was introduced to Marty, I was told sort of the story, geez, this guy invented this open source thing and now he's going to commercialize it. Didn't get it. And I was like, okay, so you're going to take something that's free and both to consumers and competitors and build a company. How's that going? And what I didn't get initially is how important the notion of project control was. Because project control really creates an unfair barrier to at least the competitors using the technology. And as I learned more about the security market, which I didn't know much about when I first started, I got that Snort really wasn't scaling that well in the enterprise, and there were all kinds of things that you could do to make it work better. So, given that, I thought about the struggles that we've been through at Riverbed and observed in other places, which is establishing credibility, establishing a market, establishing a brand, demonstrating that your technology is viable. All that stuff was done, and so so for all those reasons, I found SourceFire really, really compelling, because if all those things are done, really all you have to do is build a team that can execute. Right? You don't have to evangelize. You don't have to create a market. You don't have to improve technology. And so those are huge advantages. The negative, or one of the principal negatives back in those days, was that open source was kind of taboo. I mean, many companies were afraid of indemnification issues time frame was that one of our principal competitors was Cisco, that they had as much open source as we did, save one little piece. But they've been very crafty about emphasizing the fact that they're open source, and so we figured that out. But indemnification concerns was one of the negatives. And other is that some number of folks, mid-tier and below, are okay with the fact that Smart doesn't scale because they don't need it to. And so it forced us up market, which forced us into building fairly expensive sales force. The other was that it limited our potential acquirer base, because many companies couldn't get past the notion of this thing being freely available, even though really SourceFire was 70 or 80% proprietary. And I think, I remember an early meeting that we had back in 2002, I speculated that SourceFire would have to get public to get liquid. And it was because that last week. It's just, there are just some number of companies that can't get through corp dev the notion of buying something that's free. But, in the end, I think the positives offset the negatives.
Wayne, you mentioned a few times about the importance of the team and bringing your team on board. Talk about that process, how you went about that.
Yeah, this was one of the more interesting debates I've had in my career. When I got to SourceFire, saw that Marty was selling gear out of his living room. Literally, he did about $200,000 in 2001 before he had an office. When I got into SourceFire, saw inbound requests for quotes without ever having made contact with customers. And I found that pretty stunning after my experience at Riverbed when we had to sort of push a rope to get any kind of deal. And my immediate reaction is, oh my God, let's build a sales force and take advantage of this huge opportunity. The problem was that this was in the depths of the telecom implosion, and so the notion of building a company aggressively in those days was just nonsensical. And so we had some really interesting debates. I'm sure you remember a lot of those about building a team and investing money and increasing the burn rate. That was really non-fashionable. And so ultimately we decided to do that. And I've had the good fortune to work with some amazing people. And one of the benefits of actually growing the company when no one else was that they were available. So rather than being CEOs and VPs of sales and all that kind of stuff, and some new startup, they were available. And so I brought in, try to get the sequencing right. I brought Alan Mail in, run international for me at Riverbed, and who ran international for me at SourceFire. John Negrone, who was our VP of East and Fed, who now runs North America at SourceFire. Brought in Tom McDonough, who was my VP of Sales at Riverbed, who now is the Chief Operating Officer at SourceFire. Basically just did what I could to just take advantage of the opportunity that these guys had. And we had an extremely expensive but enormously capable team by September, October of 2002. And that team is still in place at SourceFire, carrying a $90 million number. Whatever it is still. I don't really know what the number is. So anyway, the risk in doing that is that you haven't really figured out the formula and you scale up a big burn rate and find out the formula wasn't right and now are out of money. But I think we had reasonable evidence that the formula was there. And you could argue made the company by hiring extraordinarily talented people early on.
I know you're on JACB's board. What other boards are you serving on?
Xenos, which
Okay.
is open source network management. Triumphant, which is now moving into the security sector, doing
Right.
compliance. A little green fuels company called Alternative Fuels Group, which was founded by one of my former crew chiefs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where is that one?
It's sort of virtual. He came up with a method for making biodiesel through a non-thermodynamic process. So basically, put a bunch of stuff in a garbage can, mix, and pour it into your gas tank. The problem with the fuels business is that it takes years to get certified.
Yeah.
And so they're about 90% of the way through EPA certification. And once they get through that, they'll turn into a real company. But everybody, but you know, the companies with money that serve a must-have kind of need are doing pretty well. It's surprising.
Like Xenos?
You mentioned sometimes when you fail to fail. Now, what could an entrepreneur, what lessons would you want an entrepreneur to learn from your experiences?
Be lucky at some level. You know, I think, you know, one of the things, you know, we talked a lot about sort of the personality, especially at SourceFire, because the company lasted long enough to sort of do that analysis. And the one common thread across the company and the P1 company was just an absolute unwillingness to lose. You know, they just, every single person in that company, if you meet them, has this competitive thread that is just not very easy to miss. So having determination is obviously key. Being willing to think creatively and outside of sort of the necessary box, I think, is important. You know, at least some of the decisions that we made that allowed Riverbed and SourceFire to succeed were counterintuitive. You know, hiring a great sales force when people are sort of flatlining and burned. You know, being willing to get on a plane to have breakfast at Denny's on a Saturday to save a deal. You know, they're just things like that. But the other, and you know, if you're out of money now, it's really, really tough. I mean, there aren't many good answers to that one. But one of my other philosophies, and again, it's happy to debate this, but I've always believed in raising way too much money way earlier than you need it. You know, and the belief being that, you know, the dilution that you suffer in doing that, you know, is way offset by the risk mitigation of having too much money. No good answer. I'd be happy to talk about what specifically you're facing, but you know, having money and talent is a good start.
Speaking of raising funds, you're on the boards of some startup companies. Right now, it's hard to raise venture money just because their returns are tough. But are you starting to see angels coming back in? Which I've been seeing angels saying, if I can lose 50% in Fortune 500 companies, I might as well bet on startups. Are you starting to see anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's clearly an inefficiency that can be exploited right now. I mean, you know, I've seen a number of companies that are sort of finding themselves, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 years into their initial venture investment, and in an environment where LPs don't want to have capital calls, and venture firms are trying to figure out which of their 14 companies they're going to save. There are a number of companies that are either going away or getting recapped at valuations that I think create real opportunities for folks that have money. And so angels are clearly, you know, one of the sources that can take advantage of that. I also think, you know, public companies like SourceFire that have cash are going to increasingly look at those kind of deals as ways to, you know, spur incremental growth and get incremental technology. But yeah, so I mean, it has to. I mean, something's got to fill that void. I mean, way back in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the innovation was driven by corporate America. IBM's the board. And those people are out of business. I mean, IBM's a services company, you know, despite the commercials. And so, if we are going to innovate in this company, it's got to come from somewhere. Repeat.
I'm just wondering, you know, with today being Security Day, you know, what, and your experience with the internet security, you know, what are you thinking about the prevalence of, you know, more and more commerce obviously moving to the internet, and there being more, you know, organized efforts at, you know, trying to undermine that process or exploit it? How do you kind of see that in terms of evolving the internet and security?
I think it's a problem that's sufficiently big that it's good that people don't know how bad it is. You know, the way hackers work is to find some, I mean, in the early days, sort of the script kiddie thing, you know, you could write macros that would do bad stuff and make noise and sort of make hackers famous. People figured out how to neutralize those with AV and other stuff, other technologies. People got more sophisticated going after vulnerabilities that were generally known, with more targeted attacks, and people like sort of figured out how to stop those. You know, now you've got nation states and organized crime units that are implication of that is that they figure out where systems are weak before the manufacturer of the operating system are weak. And when that happens, there's not much that anybody can do to stop those attacks. And I know of a number of instances where the federal government lost pretty sensitive stuff to what looked like nation-state attacks. And there wasn't a whole lot they could do about it. And so it's a huge potential concern. And ultimately, I think it's going to allow for the creation of a new kind of security approach. I'm not sure I want to start it, but at some point, really, the only way to prevent losses is to watch the behaviors of the endpoints themselves and watch as they change. Because I think the simple fact of the matter is that if you have a device that's connected, it can be exploited. So, the important initial approach is to install ADT on the front door and put a sign out by your mailbox that makes you less appealing to the neighbor. But ultimately, when everybody has a sign by their mailbox, then you're going to be as vulnerable as anybody else. So it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, data theft is going to continue to happen, unfortunately. Hey, Ray.
You recently went to this executive program up at Harvard on corporate governance.
I did.
Great insights from that.
Yeah. One was just how many conflicts there are in the notions of proper corporate governance. One of the more important ones nowadays is the notion of independence. Right? So the notion of being CEO and chairman is not factual anymore. You need outside directors. And one of the problems with independence in corporate governance is that people frequently don't know enough about the business to make thoughtful decisions about strategy and oversight. I know, I wish I could remember the case study, but one of the case studies that we did was about the first of the mortgage brokers that went bankrupt. And one of their board members was Henry Kissinger. Right? So brilliant guy, obviously, and I'm sure one of the most engaging dinner partners you can imagine. But what did he know about repackaging and repurposing debt instruments and marketing those things to people like JP? And so they're really struggling with how to redefine proper corporate structure so that you have a sufficient degree of insight on a board where there may be, which may introduce conflict, while preserving independence on part of the shareholders. So that was the most interesting one. And other interesting was that I got to sit next to one of the CEOs of one of the banks that's taken TARP money. At the time, it was insightful to hear the whole context of this mortgage crisis and how insulated every part of that food chain thought they were from disaster. But how the linkages were sufficiently strong that the failure of any results in the failure of all. But the notion of independence is really tough. I mean, apologize in advance if it doesn't want to disclose it, but one of my racing buddies was Burt Roberts, a guy who was the CEO of MCI and was on WorldCom's board when they imploded. And this is a little bit off track, but I mean, I don't know if you know how the whole WorldCom thing happened, but basically it was, at least as alleged, Scott Sullivan engineering revenue and profitability. But what isn't talked about much, and the reason I bring this up is because the professors used WorldCom as a case study in the failure of proper corporate governance. And I, knowing Bert and having been a friend of his through the whole process, sort of raised my hand and said, I think you got it wrong. And as it happened, so Sullivan did this financial engineering, but disclosed what he was doing to the auditors, which was Anderson, who in turn reported to the audit committee the procedures that he was following at the time, who in turn reported to the board that everything was fine. And so when WorldCom imploded, the mob kind of ruled the day, and the government brought to bear a sufficient degree of pressure that they settled. And from the perspective, from Bert's perspective, which seems perfectly reasonable to me, how on earth could he have known that financial engineering was going on in the accounting department when the audit committee and auditors were telling the board that everything was okay? And so figuring out how directors should and shouldn't weave themselves into the tactical operations of the business for their sort of oversight responsibilities is a really hard one. The judge in that case wrote in his opinion that in WorldCom's case, that directors had a responsibility to bring their own experts to bear in the process of their oversight. So, geez, you guys should have hired your own auditors. So, great for, I don't want to say anything about Deloitte. Anyways, great for the auditing world, but not so great for directors. So those kind of conflicts were also really, really interesting.
One more question, last question.
Wayne, when you look around the room, you see core capital, blue chip, and Brent and Steve. Everybody's supporting, either from a capital or services standpoint, early stage and growth software companies. How do you see the best of breed point solution approach versus the integrated suite with Ellison buying 2 or 3 companies every quarter? How do you see that over the next 5 years unfolding, and what do you think the customer base will view the attractiveness of point solutions from smaller companies that we all support versus the integrated suite from Symantec, Oracle, all going forward?
For years, people speculated and still speculate that SourceFire is going to become irrelevant because McAfee's going to have everything. They don't want to rely on everything. I think a short answer to your question is it depends on the sector and how important failure in that mission is. In SourceFire's case, as I mentioned earlier, we pursued the high end of the market where people really had to care. And for those folks, breaches in security were just unacceptable. And so for that sector, I think best of breed is going to live forever. In other areas like CRM, where keeping track of expenses and revenue, I think those will tend to commoditize more quickly. The other thing I worry a little bit about when markets are installed as they are, worry about this with Jackie, as an example, is that normally small companies are so quick to innovate, big companies just can't. They have no chance to keep up with those emerging markets. And now when small companies really don't have the opportunities to get liquid and get big, especially when they're capital constrained, I worry that the big guys will eventually figure it out enough that their customers are okay with what they put together. So, anyway, so the short answer I think depends on the sector, but the longer answer I think is it puts a lot of pressure on the folks that are sort of in that nether region.
Thank you very much, Wayne. Great.
So that was Wayne Jackson, the former CEO of SourceFire, here at the Tech Venture Center TVC Legends series with Deloitte.